Hello Orchid friends, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time watching my video, my channel is all about orchids. From what orchids I have, how I grow them, my thoughts on certain orchid topics, to what orchids in my collection are blooming, etc. So if you want to follow along my orchid hobby adventure, please consider subscribing to my channel and turn on the notification. What we have here today is my Phalaenopsis pulchra. This is a species. I have talked about this orchid in my channel for a couple times. The first time I think I was talking about its aerial roots, and then the second time it was about its keiki and how this keiki was getting heavier and heavier and what I did to help support the keiki spike. And then I did a repot video on this orchid to plant its aerial roots back into the media. Out of all the comments I got, one Chinese subscriber was appalled by the fact that I repotted aerial roots into the media. He thought I was basically torturing this orchid. So this video is more about an update as well as to provide reasons on why I needed to do the repot. For your convenience, let's take a quick look at some of the highlights from the repot video that I did back in September 2019. At the time, this orchid has a keiki that had been growing for quite some time. It even grew to a point where it just gotten too heavy that the spike couldn't support it, so it actually bent in half. But thankfully, I was able to find a long enough stick to prop it up, and because some of the tissues were still connected, so this orchid continued to grow without having any signs of dehydration. So I decided to keep this keiki on the spike along with the mother plant for as long as I can. And another reason is I really don't want another orchid of the same type taking up another horizontal space on my growing rack. So this is another somewhat of a selfish reason. And this is what it looked like after I pulled it out of the pot. Inside the media, I think only about a third of the roots were viable, and 2/3 of the older roots were gone. So what I needed to do was to take it under a faucet and just basically gave it a good rinse. And the reason for that also is because I wanted to get rid of any dead tissue as well as to moisten the aerial roots, because I knew that I wanted to repot the aerial roots back into the media, and because they're so dry, they are very snappy. You can easily break the filament. So if you moisten them, if you wet the aerial roots, they are easier to work with when you need to somehow push them into the container or the pot. Another tip about rinsing your orchid is if your faucet have both hot water and cold water, make sure you adjust the water temperature so that it's lukewarm and not completely cold. And with a cutting tool, you always want to make sure you sterilize it before you actually do the cutting, to avoid cross-contamination or some kind of disease being carried from one plant to another. And you could use hydrogen peroxide or alcohol or even fire to sterilize the cutting tool. For alcohol, I think most people can easily get 50% concentration, but if you can find 70%, that's also fine. Hydrogen peroxide typically is a 3% solution that you can find at pharmacies, so those are readily available. Now, after I trim off all the roots, like I suspected, about 2/3 of the roots were gone, so I was really happy that I actually did the repot when I did, because if the roots in the media continue to rot away, there is really no way for me to properly hydrate this orchid, because I don't miss these aerial roots at all. So what I had done was, because the aerial roots were already softer, because they were wet, so I use a counterclockwise or clockwise if you prefer, and slowly turn them and push them into the media or the container. And the media that I use is a mixture of manto clay, the smaller pebble, and then hydrocorn, the bigger pebble. Last time, I think I did the ratio of 1:1, and this time around, I wanted to make sure I give it even more aeration. So the ratio between them is 1 part small pebble to 2 parts bigger pebble. So 1 part manto clay, 2 parts hydrocorn. And I even drill holes at the bottom of the cup because that way it gives me more flexibility for in between 2 different methods. And the one method is semi-hydro, and the other method is traditional method with drainage hole at the bottom. So what I would do is I double cup it if I decide that I want to give this orchid more water retention, then I double cup it and that becomes semi-hydro. But then if I decide to take that cup away and just let the water drain out through the holes at the bottom, then it's a traditional inorganic setup. Another thing that I like to do after the repot is I don't give water right away. Usually I wait for 1 week, so I will skip 1 watering to let this orchid adjust to the new media, as well as to dry up some velamen that I may have broken or snapped, ruptured during the repot process. And that seems to have always worked really well for me. But with this orchid, because it was not having that many good roots in the media to begin with, so I actually soak this orchid really well right after the repot. But then I ensure that this orchid had a lot of ventilation and good drainage right after the repot. So that's what I did differently this time for this orchid, and it actually was okay. This orchid did really well after the repot. Another thing I did was I put a hydrocorn pebble inside of the blue outer cup. That is because I wanted to elevate slightly the inner cup, so that way there is more air in between cups to allow additional ventilation. And now, fast forward, we're at October 2019, 3 weeks after the repot. This orchid immediately shows signs of growth in terms of roots, as well as growth in terms of leaves. Active growth, whether it's root or leaf, for an orchid after a repot is always a very good sign that the repot was in time and was done correctly. So at that time, even the Keiki was growing new roots and enlarging its latest leaf. So that was a very encouraging sign for me to see. So back to the reasons why I wanted to do the repot for this orchid and put all the area roots into the media. Number 1, it didn't have that many good roots in the media, and I want to make sure that it has enough roots in the media to absorb water and intake nutrients. And number 2, this orchid had so many area roots that I feel was taking up too much space around it, and every time I move around this orchid or orchids around this orchid, I was afraid that I would break these lovely area roots, which I love seeing. However, I really wanted to do the right thing for this orchid as well as conserve space, my horizontal space, and that's why the repot was needed and wanted. But what surprised me was that subscribers' comment about me torturing this orchid by putting all the area roots back into the pot. I disagree completely, and because I think when done right, this orchid can do okay. When done right, area roots can be repotted into the cup. Because sometimes when you have rootless orchid but with some area roots, those roots are your last resort to somehow revive the orchid. And the only way you can save this orchid is really to, guess what, repot it back into the media. And just judging by December, end of December, the root growth of this orchid, especially inside the media and at the bottom of the cup, you can tell that this orchid was thriving, even in winter time. So I guess the point I'm trying to make here is if you need to, if you have to, don't be afraid to put aerial roots back into the media to save the orchid or provide better growing condition. But you do have to be careful. Aerial roots may not be used to high moisture environment, so you do need to give it time, maybe just a longer dry period to begin with, and then gradually increase the water amount and water retention. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!